In this lecture, we're going to use the tracker and the tracking data that we solved for earlier to do a match move and actually track another image, another still image to this landscape footage that we have. So the plan is to take this image and use the sky from this image to put in place of the sky that we had in our other landscape footage. So the first thing we want to do, obviously, if you have a close look, this landscape footage of ours is in HD, so it's 1920 by 1080. And this other image, the still image, is a 4K image. So first thing we want to do is reformat this image so it's in the same aspect ratio, so we don't have any issues down the line with our aspect ratio. So what I'll do is, one, I'm going to put a shuffle node down and set our alpha to solid white and essentially give our image an alpha channel. So we'll set this to 1. So now we have an alpha channel. And then what we're going to do is grab a reformat node and have this image reformat to our HD image. So now we're in the same aspect ratio, so everything should play nice from here. So what we're going to do is just do a really simple mask for the sky here, so we don't need all the horizon and foreground areas from this image. So what we could do is simply grab a we could grab a ramp, and what we could do is move this ramp up like so. Make sure it's straight. And we'll use this as our alpha for this image right here. And what we'll do is we could multiply this against our image. So we'll go B input being our image and the ramp being our alpha right there. And we could always adjust this ramp just so we could have a little bit more fall off if we wanted. Move this up just so there's a little bit more transition in that image. Now what we'll do is if we just do a straight merge and put this over our landscape image, that's pretty cool. Obviously, we need to get into doing roto or some kind of luma key to isolate our foreground plant and also our mountain ranges. But for right now, we're not going to get into that. We're just going to have a quick look at what this image does. And what I could do is kind of lower this a little bit more, make sure it's straight, and move this fall off in a little bit. So right now, if I press play, you could see our sky is not doing anything because it's a single image. Our plate underneath is moving, but our clouds aren't moving with it. So in order to get our clouds to move with this footage underneath, we need to use this tracking information and have it match move with our plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our tracker 1 that we solved for earlier and plug this into the input of our image we want to apply the match move to. And then under this transform tab, we'll set the transform type to match move. And the other thing you want to do is this track reference frame, you want to set this to the frame you're using to line up your image. So right now we're on frame 1, so that should be fine. So we'll say set to current frame. And then if we connect the tracker to our image and we view our over node, and now if we press play, look at that. We've got our clouds moving with our footage. And that's doing a pretty good job sticking to it. Now, if you have a look, you could see that we're getting cropped right here and at the top. And the reason is this first frame, our image lines up pretty well. But if you look at the bounding box of our image, it's really just, this is the resolution for it. So we're cut off here and we're cut off at the top. So once this track starts to move, there's really no more image on the left for it. And as we get a little bit further in the timeline, you could see we don't have as much image at the top either. So we could solve for that. We could solve for that by simply just scaling up this image a little bit. And what we could do is just scale this maybe 30% or 40% just to make sure. Look at our last frame. And now we're pretty good. That might be a little bit too much of a push in, so we could just, yeah, maybe about 1.3, 30% push in. And now if we kind of scrub through here, you could see we have enough image to cover. And if you notice these red outline around our nodes right here, as well as the dotted black hash lines around it, that is letting us know it's a new feature in Nuke that our bounding box is big. So it's essentially, it's a visual warning that, hey, keep in mind your bounding box is getting too big, so this might slow down your process and your Nuke script. So it's pretty handy. Really simple way to resolve this is if we put another reformat after the fact. And you could see that eliminated the red box around this. It's essentially, we'll no longer have a large bounding box happening over here. If you don't want to use a reformat, you see that came back. You could also use a crop node. And that does the same thing. It basically just cuts anything outside of our aspect ratio of 1920 by 1080. So either way, you could use a reformat or a crop. But now if we look at our merge and we press play, we've got our sky tracking quite nicely to our landscape footage. And if we want to kind of have a closer look at that, we could bring the opacity down on this, something like that, just to make sure things are moving. And you could see our cloud edge right here against our mountains back here. Same with the the foreground bush and the clouds in the other image over here are moving pretty nicely and relative to what the plate is doing. So that's great. If one other thing to point out in our tracker, if say let's go to frame 60, and if we had used frame 60 to line up with our image right here, so for example, what we'll do is we'll take, I'm going to bypass this tracker. We'll just go straight multiply node over our image. And let's say we'll do another transform here. And let's say we had lined up this image specifically on this frame. So let's move this up a little bit. Let's move it a little bit to the left. And let's push in on this a little bit too. We'll go to 1.3 as well again. So if we had used frame 60 to line up our image, what you would want to do on your tracker node, what you want to do on the tracker point, set this reference frame to be frame 60. So this will zero out our translates so that frame 60, if I disable this, lines up exactly to what we had done. And then from here on out, if we press play, it's going to apply the same motion to it. So that's something to always keep in mind, is if you're getting a matte painting or if you've done roto that you want to track to your image, always set this reference frame and the tracker to the frame that image is coming in on, or what frame you used to line it up on. So if a digital matte painter had given you a sky with more hills and what have you painted on here, and they used frame 60 as their reference frame and not frame 1, you need to make sure you always set that same frame in the tracker so that it lines up on that initial lineup frame and the rest of it can just match move and track along with it. The last thing to point out with the track node is if you don't want to directly connect this as well, there's another option. If I detach this real quick, if we go back to our tracker tab, there's this export option here, and you have the option of exporting corner pins with the current frame, or you could use the transform reference frame, or you could bake out all the keyframes, as well as you could do the match move or stabilization, etc. here. So if you don't necessarily want to use this tracker node and you want to keep this kind of, you know, detached and off screen, you just want to use the tracking data from it, what we could do is in the export tab, we could we want to select the transform match moved, and we could bake out the keyframes. If we don't bake it out, so if I select this transform match move and I hit create, you'll see an expression link with this tracker node, this transform node with these values linked to the tracker. So if we look into this transform tab, you could see this translate values are the same as what our tracker is showing. Same with the center frame. So that's what the transform export looks like. The other option is you could bake out the keyframe so you don't have this link set. So here we could go to transform match move baked, and if we hit create, now we have these keyframes baked in within this node, and it's no longer dependent on what this tracker is. So there's pros and cons to each. If for some reason, the nice thing about having the link is if we changed our reference frame on this, on the reference frame of the tracker, so say we'll set this to frame 10 and set to current frame, you'll see our tracker zero out. So it's going to always link to what this tracker has done. Whereas if we've baked the keyframes out, it no longer changes and updates to it. So that's the difference between exporting out transform match move baked or just transform match move will keep the links keep the links to it. So it's completely up to the user at that point how you want to use it. But in this case, now we could use this baked out transform, and we'll make sure to crop this as well so our bounding box doesn't get any bigger. So now we could press play, and we got our transform doing the match move based on this tracker without us actually using this tracker in our stream.